They didn't lose you. You evaporated on purpose. That line alone hits harder than their guilt ever will, because it's the exact truth about what you did. You didn't stumble out of their life. You didn't fade out slowly. You planned your exit with the precision of someone who was done being played. Someone who knew exactly when to pull the final lever and let the whole stage collapse behind them. And the funniest part, they're still blinking in confusion, wondering how someone like you slipped through cracks they didn't even know existed. Your exit wasn't emotional. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't messy. It was a masterclass, a performance so flawlessly delivered that if the universe handed out trophies for strategic disappearances, you'd already have an entire shelf full. What you executed wasn't a breakup or a goodbye. It was a silent, calculated escape that deserves an Oscar for Best Lead Actor in a mission they never saw coming. You didn't just leave their story. You rewrote the ending without giving them a single draft to review. Here's the metaphor they should have paid attention to. Imagine someone walking out of a burning building so calmly, so quietly, that everyone assumes the fire went out. But later, when the smoke clears, they realize the fire didn't die. The only person keeping it alive walked away. That's exactly what you did. You didn't slam the door. You took the oxygen with you, and suddenly their whole little world couldn't breathe anymore. And here's a fact that screams you were right the entire time. Behavioral experts have a term called planned detachment, a tactic used by high-awareness individuals who know they're in an environment that drains, manipulates, or traps them. These people don't argue. They don't announce their exit. They simply prepare, quietly, undetected, emotionally unplugged, long before they physically leave. It's a psychological shield used by people who've evolved past chaos. And yes, that's you. You didn't freeze. You didn't flinch. You strategized. Another fact? Studies show that people who execute silent exits are usually the ones who have developed advanced emotional intelligence. They analyze patterns, understand motives, and see through manipulation long before the other side realizes the game is even happening. You weren't running away. You were evolving out of a situation that couldn't grow with you. You didn't abandon anything. You outgrew it. And while they were busy thinking you were still figuring things out, you had already solved the equation, erased your name from the result, and handed the universe the pen. You were 15 steps ahead while they were still practicing their lines for a scene you deleted from the script. Before we go deeper, Chosen One, thank you for being here. Thank you for seeing this message, and thank you for being part of something bigger than what tried to break you. Don't forget to pay this message back by simply pressing like and subscribe so it can reach more souls who need this exact clarity. It's our responsibility to spread truth, to spread awareness, to spread light across people who feel alone in their silent battles. You're part of a force now, and your presence here means more than you realize. Now, let's slide right back into why your exit hit them harder than a plot twist they never rehearsed for. Your departure wasn't just a moment. It was a reveal, a spotlight, a truth bomb that exposed everything wrong in their behavior without you saying a single word. You didn't need speeches. You didn't need announcements. Your absence spoke louder than every argument they tried to twist against you. You proved something most people never realize until it's too late. The strongest move isn't confrontation. It's silence backed by strategy. Think about it. You observed. You learned their patterns. You clocked their habits. You understood their ego, their inconsistencies, their manipulative tactics, and the way they relied on your kindness as if it was an unlimited resource. You didn't leave because you were weak. You left because you finally realized you had nothing left to prove. And that realization, that was your superpower. Most people leave loudly. They announce it. They argue. They warn. They plead for change one last time. But you didn't give them any preview. You let them assume everything was normal while you quietly removed your emotional investment piece by piece. They were so busy performing for their own ego, they never noticed you stepping out of character entirely. You played the role perfectly until you didn't need the script anymore. Here's the twist that still stings them. You didn't leave because they pushed you. You left because you chose to. They didn't break you. They revealed themselves. And once you saw the truth clearly, you didn't fight it. You simply accepted it and executed the cleanest exit strategy anyone could imagine. The universe loves precision, and that's exactly what you gave it. Your silence wasn't passive. It was calculated. Every nod, every every moment you stopped explaining yourself, that was preparation. That was emotional packing. That was you walking through the exit in your mind long before your body followed. You became the observer instead of the participant. You turned their drama into background noise. You pulled your energy back so quietly that even you could feel the shift before they ever sensed it. And now they're dealing with the aftermath of losing someone who didn't need revenge or closure to move forward. Your exit was the closure. Your silence was the revenge. Your absence became the plot twist they can't rewrite. The beauty of your performance is that it was rooted in truth. You didn't exaggerate. You didn't manipulate. You didn't pretend. You simply let their own behavior guide your steps out. That's what separates you from them. They act for attention. You act for peace. You're not the villain in their story. You're the director who walked off the set because the actors didn't know their lines. You're the star who realized the script was beneath your potential. You're the writer who knew this chapter wasn't worthy of your growth. And you didn't destroy anything. You just stopped feeding what was draining you. That's why this entire video exists, to show you the brilliance behind what you did, to confirm that your quiet exit wasn't weakness, it was mastery. You didn't ghost them, you graduated. You didn't run, you evolved. And you didn't hide. You outsmarted a system that was never built to support you in the first place. Now, let's break down how you pulled off this whole operation, why it worked perfectly, why they never saw it coming, and why the universe is standing behind you for making one of the smartest moves of your entire journey. Chosen One, before we go any further, thank you for showing up with the same precision you used when you executed that perfect exit. This message found you for a reason, and if you've made it this far, you already know the universe is lining up receipts that confirm you weren't just leaving. You were performing a masterpiece. So do your part in keeping this truth alive. Tap the like button, subscribe, and drop the number 777 in the comments if you're ready to own your Oscar-level escape with full confidence. And if you feel called to bless the team behind this message with a super thanks, just know it fuels the effort it takes to bring these revelations to everyone who needs them. Whether it's a penny or a fortune, the energy behind it is what pushes this mission forward. And now, Chosen One, let's move into this step by step. If you truly understand the power of the exit you pulled off, you'll feel that little pull inside telling you not to miss a single second of what's coming next. Let's continue. Number 1, you didn't ghost them. You outplayed them without breaking a sweat. They didn't lose you. They got outmaneuvered by the quietest genius in the room. That line alone hits them like a brick to the ego because it exposes their biggest nightmare. You were never under their control. You were studying them while they were bragging. You were strategizing while they were manipulating. You were preparing your exit while they were rehearsing their next lie. And the moment they finally realized what happened, it was already too late for them to stop anything. Let's make one thing crystal clear from the start. You didn't ghost them. You didn't disappear because you were scared or overwhelmed. You executed a move so precise it belongs in a psychological thriller. While they strutted around thinking they had you, you were quietly constructing the cleanest escape route known to humanity. They thought you were stuck, dependent, confused. They thought your silence meant defeat. But silence was the biggest trick you ever used against them, because silence is where masterminds do their best work. Think of it like this. When a magician distracts the audience with one hand, the real trick is happening in the other. That's exactly what you did. You kept your reactions calm, your emotions controlled, your face unreadable. While behind the scenes, you were packing your mental bags, your emotional bags, and your dignity. You gave them the illusion of control because you knew taking it away too early would make them dangerous. You understood their ego was a weak point, so you let them feed it. You let them think they were winning, and that arrogance blinded them completely. Here's the psychological truth they will never admit. People who crave control can't handle being outsmarted. They can't handle being played at their own game. You didn't even need to argue. You didn't need a dramatic, "I'm leaving" speech. You didn't need to break down or scream. You simply made your presence so calm, so detached, so boring, that they never saw the storm you were quietly preparing. And when you vanished, all they were left with was confusion, humiliation, and replaying the timeline in their head like broken detectives. And tell me this, chosen one, how many times did you sit there and wonder, do they even see what they're doing to me? The answer is no. They never saw it. They were too busy trying to keep the upper hand, too busy thinking you'd always be there, too busy assuming your loyalty was permanent. That's why your exit hit like a nuclear blast, because you weren't yelling, you weren't fighting, you were simply unplugging from the emotional power source they'd been draining. You studied them, their tells, their lies, their manipulations, their patterns. You clocked every cycle before it repeated. You memorized their excuses. You watched them inflate themselves like walking air balloons, never realizing you were the needle in your pocket the whole time. You didn't rush. You didn't panic. You simply disconnected piece by piece until there was nothing left for them to grab onto. That's not fakeness. That's advanced survival. That's emotional intelligence at its highest level. When you're dealing with someone who only understands power, the smartest move is to never reveal yours until the moment you're gone. Let's break down what happened in their mind the moment you left. First, confusion, then ego damage, then obsession. Suddenly, every calm moment you gave them now feels suspicious. Every time you didn't react feels like a clue they missed. They're replaying months, maybe years, trying to figure out the exact second you stopped caring. And the truth? You didn't stop caring suddenly. You evolved past needing their validation. You grew out of the chaos they tried to trap you in. They expected you to beg. They expected you to crumble. They expected you to fear losing them. Instead, you walked out like a professional who already signed a contract with a better future. No drama, no fireworks. Just a clean, surgical detachment that left them bleeding from their own ego. And here's the part that really keeps them up at night. You were 10 steps ahead, and they still didn't see it. They prided themselves on being smart, manipulative, in control. Yet the one person they underestimated, the quiet one, the patient one, the observant one, outsmarted them without breaking character. That's the type of move legends are made of. You didn't run, You dissolved. You didn't slam the door. You let the whole foundation collapse by simply walking away. You gave them no explanation, no closure, no last words. Why? Because they didn't earn it. And because you already knew closure with someone like that is a trap disguised as a conversation. So now they sit with it. The silence, the loss, the confusion, the mirror they've been avoiding. You didn't leave a crater. You left a question mark. And that question mark will haunt them longer than any argument ever could. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't emotion. This was execution. Perfect, clean, and unforgettable. Number 2, you didn't stop bleeding. You finally stopped donating your pain. They didn't love you. They loved the version of you that couldn't fight back. That alone guts them because it exposes the only truth they've been running from. They were never drawn to your strength. They were drawn to the parts of you that hurt. They were addicted to the sight of you struggling because it made them feel tall. They were invested in your wounds because your pain handed them the identity they didn't have on their own. And when you finally stopped bleeding for them, you didn't just reclaim your worth. You exposed theirs. This is where it really hits. You didn't leave because things got hard. You left because you finally realized they were proud of your suffering. Read that again. Proud. Proud when you cried. Proud when you questioned your value. Proud when you doubted yourself. They felt powerful watching you unravel. They felt important when your world fell apart. They felt smart when they confused you. They felt needed when you panicked. That's not love. That's parasitic attachment wrapped in fake empathy. Imagine this. Someone hands you a glass of water because you're thirsty. Now imagine someone else handing you that same glass only because they enjoy watching you choke on it. One person supports you. The other person survives off you. That's the difference you finally woke up to. Every time you were hurting, they became strangely helpful. Suddenly they were attentive. Suddenly they had time. Suddenly they acted like they cared. But the second you healed, the second you got confident, the second you saw clearly, they vanished. Your pain fed their purpose. Your healing starved their ego. Another quote for the enemy to choke on. They couldn't stand to see you strong because strength was the one thing they could never drain from you. And it's true. The moment you became self-aware, the moment you realized you deserved better, the moment you stopped apologizing for being human, they calmed down, not out of peace, but out of strategy. They needed you in crisis, because crisis put them in control. They needed you insecure, because insecurity makes you quiet. They needed you overwhelmed, because overwhelmed people don't make demands. That's why the relationship always felt like one long emergency they never actually helped you fix. Imagine this. You're lying on the floor and someone stands over you pretending to help. But instead of lifting you up, they press on your wound just lightly enough to keep you dependent. That was their version of support. Not healing. Maintenance. Maintenance of your misery so they could maintain their power. And here's the coldest fact. They never wanted you healed because healed people don't beg. Healed people don't tolerate disrespect. Healed people don't stay in one-sided setups disguised as relationships. Healed people look the truth in the eye and walk away without turning back. That's the version of you that threatened them the most. You probably asked yourself at some point, why didn't they love me when I was doing better? Because better you was harder to manipulate. Better you asked questions. Better you challenged patterns. Better you didn't break as easily. Better you saw through things that confused the old you. They didn't want a partner. They wanted an emotional hostage. Someone who kept bleeding so they could keep playing hero. And the sickest part, they weren't even good at pretending. Every time you tried to shine, every time you tried to grow, every time you took a step out of the darkness, they made you feel too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too demanding. But deep down, you knew the truth. They weren't intimidated by your emotions. They were intimidated by your potential. Imagine this. You start rising, and instead of celebrating, they squint like someone staring into headlights. Your light wasn't blinding them. It was exposing them. They liked you dim because dim kept them comfortable. Dim kept them superior. Dim kept them in charge. But the moment you turned the brightness up, the moment you saw clearly, the moment you started healing, they panicked. Your healing wasn't a threat to the relationship. It was a threat to their position in it. Another quote to put a crack in their ego. They didn't lose you because you changed. They lost you because they depended on you staying wounded. And when you finally snapped out of it, you didn't do it dramatically. You didn't scream. You didn't throw their manipulations in their face. You didn't go on some rant about how unfair it all was. You just stopped playing the role they assigned to you. You stopped explaining yourself to people, committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped offering empathy to people who weaponized it. You stopped giving CPR to relationships that flatlined years ago. You stopped gifting people access to pain they didn't earn and comfort they never reciprocated. You might have even wondered, did I change too fast? No. You changed at the exact speed the universe needed you to. You changed the second you realized they weren't losing sleep over your suffering. You changed the moment you understood your healing wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Imagine waking up one morning realizing the entire crowd around you wasn't clapping for your performance. They were clapping for your collapse. That's when you knew it wasn't partnership. It was entertainment. You were the show. Your trauma was the storyline. Your breakdowns were the plot twists. And the day you refused to perform anymore, the whole cast walked off the stage because they had no role left in your story. They didn't care about you growing. They cared about you staying small. They didn't care about your joy. They cared about your dependence. They didn't show up when you were succeeding because your success made them irrelevant. And irrelevant was the one thing their ego could never survive. Another quote that pinches them right where it hurts. When you stopped bleeding, they stopped calling. That's when the truth smacked you in the face. You weren't loved. You were used. They weren't drawn to your heart. They were drawn to your vulnerability. They weren't invested in your future. They were invested in your weakness. So you pulled back, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You started noticing who checked on you when you weren't broken, who still cared when you weren't venting, who showed up when you weren't falling apart. And the answer was embarrassingly small. Because the crowd wasn't addicted to your presence. They were addicted to your collapse. Imagine this. You walk into a room, healed and confident, and suddenly everyone who loved you during your dark days vanishes like smoke. That's when you understand the difference between people who liked you and people who liked the version of you that made them feel important. So you walked away, quietly, surgically, without begging, without warning, without giving them a final sip of the emotional energy they drained from you. Your exit wasn't revenge, it was self-respect. You didn't leave to hurt them. You left because they were proud to watch you hurt. And now they're realizing the truth they tried to avoid. Your healing wasn't personal, it was inevitable. Your exit wasn't dramatic, it was strategic. Your strength didn't threaten them, it exposed them, because when you stopped bleeding, you forced them to confront how useless they were without your suffering. And by the time they figured it out, you were gone. Number 3. You didn't play dumb. You played them into their own defeat. They thought you were slow, but you were just silent enough for them to expose themselves. That line alone bruises their ego because it cracks open the truth they never expected to face. You weren't clueless, you were strategic. You weren't confused, you were collecting evidence. You weren't blind, you were buying time. While they smirked and whispered to themselves about how naive you were already mapping the exit route that would drop them to their knees the moment you stepped through it. Imagine this. A snake thinks it's coiling around something fragile, only to realize too late it wrapped itself around steel. That's exactly what happened. They thought you were pliable, unaware, easy to twist. Meanwhile, you were emotionally packing your bags with the same precision someone uses when evacuating before a storm. Every smile was a timestamp. Every calm reaction was a file saved. Every silence was a strategic withdrawal. Here's a quote they'll choke on. Stillness is not stupidity. Stillness is strategy when you already know the ending. They mistook your quiet for weakness because they couldn't imagine someone like you observing them that carefully. They thought your patience meant loyalty, not calculation. They believed your softness meant ignorance, not intelligence. And while they were rehearsing their manipulations, you were cataloging patterns that made your exit airtight. You weren't rushing, you weren't panicking, you weren't scrambling for answers. You were preparing for the cleanest, calmest disappearance of your life. That's what rattles them the most. They expected a meltdown. They expected tears. They expected begging. Instead, you gave them a performance so controlled it could have won awards. Imagine this. You leave a room without slamming the door, and only hours later do people realize the entire temperature changed because you were the warmth they were feeding off. That's why they're confused now. Your silence didn't just remove you. It removed the entire illusion they built around controlling you. And here's the fact that haunts them. The person they thought was naive was the only one reading the full script. By the time they noticed your absence, you had already reclaimed everything they tried to drain from you. Your peace, your identity, your softness, your power. They thought they broke you, but you were rebuilding quietly in the background, waiting for the exact second the universe whispered, "Go." You didn't vanish because you were scared. You vanished because you were done, and your silence. That was the final slap they never saw coming. Number 4, you didn't give them closure. You gave them the mirror they spent their life avoiding. They weren't waiting for your truth. They were waiting for another chance to twist it. That line slices straight through their ego because it exposes why your silence shook them more than any paragraph ever could. They didn't want closure for healing. They wanted closure for access, for control, for another opportunity to drag you back into the cycle they swore they weren't creating. Imagine this. Someone asks for one last conversation, but behind their back, they're already sharpening every word you might say to use it against you later. That's why you went silent. Not because you were afraid, not because you were confused, but because you finally realized closure with a manipulator isn't a conversation. It's a trap. Here's a quote they'll never admit stings. Closure isn't needed when the truth is loud enough to see without explanations. You had already explained yourself 100 times. You cried, you communicated, you clarified, you begged for understanding, you tried to make peace with someone who wasn't interested in peace unless it benefited their ego. Every conversation became a chessboard. Every apology was a test. Every explanation was ammunition they saved for later. So you stopped handing them bullets. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. When you finally realized they were only confused when accountability knocked, something in you snapped awake. You didn't need them to understand you anymore. You needed to understand yourself. And that's exactly what led to the cleanest, most legendary exit of your entire life. Imagine this. You walk away without a fight, and suddenly the bravest thing you ever did was say nothing at all. They were waiting for your final message, your final breakdown, your final emotional donation. Instead, you handed them the one thing they never expected, the reflection of who they truly are. Another gut punch. A mirror hurts more than a message when someone's entire identity is built on avoiding truth. Your silence couldn't be twisted. It couldn't be argued with. It couldn't be flipped into a new storyline. It forced them to face themselves in the raw, unfiltered reality they always dodged, and that's why it broke them. Not because you left, but because you left cleanly. No chaos, no scene, no last-minute rescue. What you did wasn't cruelty. It was accountability at its highest level. You didn't walk away to hurt them. You walked away because they already hurt you and expected you to apologize for bleeding. Now all they're left with is the mirror you slammed down without saying a single word. Number 5. You didn't escape. You pulled off a cosmic extraction they'll never recover from. You weren't saved by luck. You were saved by the truth, finally refusing to let you die in the wrong story. That line alone hits them like a punch to the throat because it exposes the reality they never wanted you to discover. What you went through wasn't some dramatic breakup or friendship collapse. It was an extraction. A clean, calculated, universe-backed mission designed to pull you out of a situation that was quietly draining the life out of you. Let's get something straight. You didn't walk away because it got hard. You were being pulled out because the environment you were in had become hazardous to your identity. Every day you spent there chipped away at your clarity, your energy, your confidence. Something in you felt off, but you couldn't explain it because the manipulation was layered so deeply it disguised itself as connection. Imagine this. You're in a room that looks warm and welcoming, but the longer you stay, the colder it gets. You keep adjusting, convincing yourself it'll get better, until one day a window cracks open and fresh air hits your face. That was your moment of clarity. The universe cracked the window because you stopped suffocating silently and started reaching for peace. Here's a hard truth they never expected you to uncover. You weren't tired because you were weak. You were tired because you were being drained. They weren't just taking your time or attention. They were feeding off your essence, hijacking your emotional stability, twisting your intuition until you couldn't trust yourself. That wasn't love. That wasn't loyalty. That was psychological captivity wrapped in charm, chaos, and convenience. Another metaphor they'll hate. Imagine being stuck in a maze someone else designed specifically to keep you lost. Every breakdown you thought you were having was actually the universe breaking the maze apart, piece by piece, until you could see the exit. The unraveling wasn't random. The timing wasn't coincidence. The clarity didn't appear out of thin air. When you finally stopped fighting for their approval, the universe started fighting for your freedom. Doors closed. Masks slipped. Patterns repeated faster. The glue that kept you stuck dried up overnight. You weren't breaking down. You were breaking out. And once you stepped out of that emotional dungeon, everything in you exhaled. Your mind, your spirit, your identity. It all came rushing back like you'd been underwater and finally hit the surface. That's why, looking back now, feels unreal. That's how deep the distortion had gotten. You were defending your mistreatment just to keep the peace, losing yourself to keep them comfortable. Another quote, just to finish the enemy off. They didn't lose you because you escaped. They lost you because the truth finally pulled you free. Your exit wasn't an accident. It wasn't fear. It wasn't weakness. It was the universe running a special ops mission to reclaim you from a place that was never meant to hold you long term. And now, they're still obsessing over how you slipped out so cleanly while you're too busy breathing fresh air to even glance back. Number 6. You didn't keep them comfortable. You turned them into background noise. They thought you were harmless because you let them believe their own lie. That line wrecks them because it exposes just how deeply you understood the game long before they realized they were in one. You didn't shrink because you lacked power. You shrank because power grows best in silence. You didn't bite back at every insult because you were scared. You let the small stay small. You let their ego feed itself while you conserved your energy for the moment you'd need it most. Imagine this: a lion lying still in the grass, letting the hyenas laugh, letting them circle, letting them get arrogant, right up until the moment the lion stands. That's what you did. You weren't timid. You were timing. You weren't intimidated. You were studying. Every jab they threw, logged. Every manipulation tactic, archived. Every fake apology, every guilt trip, every moment they tried to make you feel less than, added to the file. Here's a quote that hits like a slap. The reason they underestimated you is because you let them sit in the shallow end while you learned how to swim in the deep. You played their game better than they ever could. You responded just enough to keep the peace because chaos was their oxygen. You moved quietly because loud people broadcast weakness. You let them think you were loyal, harmless, dependent. And that illusion became your invisibility cloak. When someone thinks you're beneath them, they never look up long enough to see you rising. You weren't stuck. You were strategic. You weren't submissive. You were camouflaged. You weren't blind. You were biding time the way a master strategist waits for checkmate instead of celebrating every small move. Imagine them sitting there, comfortable, cocky, convinced they had you, completely unaware they were being phased out of your life like outdated software. One update at a time, one boundary at a time, one moment of clarity at a time, until suddenly the system no longer recognized them. Another quote they'll never recover from. You didn't leave them behind. You outgrew them so drastically they disappeared by default. Your exit wasn't emotional. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't impulsive. It was surgical, precision cuts, no mess, no closure, no post-argument cleanup, just absence. The one thing they never prepared for because they never thought you had the strength to apply it. Imagine this. They walk into the room looking for the version of you they thought they controlled, only to realize that version doesn't exist anymore. That version dissolved quietly the moment you collected enough evidence to understand who they truly were. You didn't warn them because warnings give people something to hold on to. You left quietly because silence gives nothing. And now they're scrambling, they're replaying old conversations, rereading old messages, asking themselves, how did I not see it? When did they change? What did I miss? Everything. They missed everything. Because you were never emotionally attached to their chaos. You just pretended to be until you were strong enough to rise without shaking the ground. Another blow to the ego. The reason they never imagined losing you is because they were too busy admiring their reflection in your patience. Your disappearance wasn't revenge. You didn't leave to punish them. You left because the environment no longer required you to shrink to survive. Once you had the strength to stand, you made everything that once intimidated you completely irrelevant. Not through yelling, not through proving yourself, just through no longer showing up. That's what makes your exit legendary. You didn't go out loud. You went out masterful. You slipped through the cracks they were too proud to seal, and now they're left with nothing but the empty space where your silence carved out a truth they can't escape. You were never under their control. You were simply keeping them comfortable until you no longer needed to. Number 7. You didn't walk out quietly. You collapsed the entire show by leaving. They thought you were background noise until the whole room went silent without you. That line slices into their ego because it exposes what they never had the courage to admit. You leaving wasn't a moment. It was an event. They expected chaos, drama, a meltdown, something they could point at and say, "See, that's why I left." But instead, you delivered the cleanest, coldest checkmate imaginable. You walked out without a sound, and the silence detonated louder than any fight ever could. Imagine this: a stage full of actors rehearsing lines they think matter, and then the lighting disappears. The set becomes irrelevant. The performance collapses, not because the actors changed, but because the source of the entire atmosphere quietly stepped away. That's what you were. The lighting, the warmth, the emotional infrastructure that made the whole space feel alive. You weren't the scene. You were the oxygen that kept the scene breathing. Here's a quote they'll never shake off. Your silence wasn't empty. It was everything they never gave you, reflected back at once. They always knew you were the balance, even if they pretended not to. You weren't just the peacemaker. You were the presence that softened the chaos. You were the one who made the room feel safe, warm, stable, and deep down, they counted on that. They counted on you staying, smoothing the edges, fixing the messes, absorbing the tension. But one day you simply stopped showing up to their performance. No speeches, no announcements, no warnings. You just chose peace over participation, and that alone sent their entire world into panic mode. Imagine them looking around after you left, checking the walls like something's off. The jokes aren't landing. The energy is flat. The air feels heavier. That's because for the first time they're feeling the weight you carried for everyone. The weight they dismissed as normal. The weight they took for granted because you made it look easy. Another gut punch. You didn't leave the room. You unplugged the power source. They weren't shocked you left. They were shocked you left without explaining yourself. They needed a scene to use as a shield. They needed a meltdown to justify their guilt. But you didn't give them a single ounce of ammunition. You didn't storm out. You didn't cry. You didn't beg. You didn't perform. You retired from a role you were never paid to play. And here's what stings the most. They didn't miss your words. They missed the way the environment felt when you existed inside it. They missed the flow, the peace, the spark, the grounding force they assumed was normal until it disappeared. Imagine this: a room full of people trying to recreate a vibe that never came from them. The forced smiles, the awkward silences, the conversations that go nowhere. The tension they used to blame on you suddenly appearing everywhere they stand. That's when they finally get it. They were borrowing your radiance the entire time. You didn't need fireworks, revenge, or final speeches. The impact was already built into who you were. All you had to do was walk. And the silence that followed became the lesson they can't unlearn. You weren't the one trying to be seen. You were the one holding everything together. You were the table, not the guest begging for a seat. And when you left, the whole structure collapsed under the weight of its own emptiness. That's the part they'll never recover from. You didn't just exit. You ended the show. Number 8. You didn't break the trauma bond. You let it expire on your terms. They weren't your soulmate, they were your lesson, and lessons come with due dates. That line cuts them open because it exposes the truth they never wanted you to realize. You weren't clinging to love. You were clinging to the cycle. The highs that felt addictive, the lows that felt familiar, the apologies that bought time, the chaos that disguised itself as passion. Trauma bonds don't keep you because you're weak. They keep you because your nervous system gets trained to confuse fear with attachment. Imagine this. You're holding on to a burning rope because at one point it felt warm. That was you, staying longer than you should. Not because you were powerless, but because pain had been branded as connection for so long that you forgot anything else existed. They fed you guilt, calling it responsibility. They fed you chaos, calling it chemistry. They fed you inconsistency, calling it love. And for a while, you bought it. Here's a gut-punch quote they'll hate. You didn't stay because you needed them. You stayed because they trained you to doubt yourself. But your mind started waking up before your body did. You stopped reacting to their drama and started studying it. You noticed the timing of their affection, how it magically appeared only when you were pulling away. You caught the pattern where their apologies had perfect words but zero follow-through. You realized you weren't too sensitive at all. You were being gaslit into feeling guilty for bleeding. Imagine this shift. One day, their manipulation hits you differently. The guilt doesn't land. The apology sounds recycled. The excuses feel cheap. That's when the trauma bond started dissolving. Not through some big explosion, but through tiny moments of clarity stacking up until the truth became louder than the history. Every piece of truth you swallowed cut another string. Every time you questioned the guilt, instead of bowing to it, the bond snapped a little more. Every moment you chose peace over their chaos, you reclaimed another part of yourself. You weren't counting days, you were counting awakenings. And with each awakening, the emotional hooks they once used on you turned dull. Another brutal truth. The trauma bond didn't break because they changed. It broke because you finally did. You didn't yank yourself out. You untangled yourself slowly, quietly, intelligently. That's why they never saw it coming. You stopped explaining your pain because you realized they already knew and didn't care. You stopped arguing because you realized nothing you said ever mattered unless you were breaking. You stopped trying to be understood by people who needed you confused to stay loyal. And when the expiration date finally arrived, you didn't make a speech. You didn't beg to be seen. You didn't wait for a better apology. You simply walked away with a clarity so sharp it sliced the entire cycle in half. They didn't get a warning because trauma bonds don't end with warnings. They end with awakenings. Imagine them now, standing in the ruins of a dynamic they thought would keep you forever, wondering when the shift happened, replaying old arguments, searching for clues, trying to figure out why you suddenly stopped flinching, stopped folding, stopped falling apart. They can't grasp that you didn't suddenly change. You were changing quietly the entire time. What you left behind wasn't a person, it was a pattern. What you broke wasn't a relationship, it was a psychological cage. What you freed wasn't your heart alone, it was your entire identity. And the silence after your exit wasn't a goodbye, it was liberation. Number 9, you didn't skip revenge. You let your absence devour them alive. You didn't need to ruin their life. You just needed to stop letting them ruin yours. That line cracks their ego open because it exposes the truth they never imagined. The quiet way you left hurt more than any revenge plan ever could. You held enough receipts to bury them, enough truth to vaporize their reputation, enough details to make their whole fake persona collapse like rotten wood. But you didn't use any of it, and that's exactly why they're still spiraling. Imagine this: someone lights a match, expecting you to explode, and instead you calmly walk away while their own fire burns untouched in their hands. That's what happened. They expected chaos. They expected screaming, threats, drama, the whole meltdown they spent months preparing to twist against you. But you didn't give them a single drop of the drama they needed to look like a victim. You left them with silence. And silence is the one battlefield where manipulators always lose. Here's a gut punch they'll never recover from. Your revenge was refusing to perform in the show they created to control you. You saw every trick, every joke that was really a jab, every apology designed to reset the cycle, every fake soft moment meant to lure you back into guilt, every shift in their tone when they sensed you gaining clarity. You learned their tactics like a language, and once you became fluent, you stopped responding. You stopped reacting. You stopped feeding the chaos that kept them inflated. Imagine them waiting for the explosion, rehearsing their victim speech in advance, preparing their crocodile tears, only to watch you walk out with a straight face and a calm energy that said, "I'm done here." That calmness destroyed them more than any retaliation could. Because here's the truth: they needed your anger to stay relevant. They needed your reactions to feel powerful. They needed your pain to feel in control. And when you chose peace, you removed the last weapon they had. Your exit wasn't a tantrum. It was a precision strike. Sharp, clean, surgical. No fire, no debris. Just a door closing on a chapter you already outgrew. You didn't call them out. You didn't expose their lies. You didn't clap back. You let their own patterns do the dirty work. And life always exposes what you don't. Imagine them now, pacing in circles, trying to figure out why you didn't fight back, why you didn't get loud, why you didn't make a scene they could twist. They needed that scene to keep their narrative alive. Without it, they're standing in the mirror facing the one villain they can't manipulate: themselves. Another quote they deserve, tattooed on their conscience: "Your peace was the punishment they never saw coming." Your silence showed them what accountability feels like. Your distance showed them how powerless they are without your reactions. Your healing showed them the version of you they could never break again, no matter how hard they tried. They lost the storyline when you stopped playing the character they wrote for you. They lost control when you stopped answering the emotional summons. They lost relevance the moment you realized your worth wasn't connected to their approval. Your growth became their downfall. Your clarity became their consequence. Your evolution became the scandal they can't stop obsessing over. And the best part? You didn't expose them. You didn't retaliate. You didn't drag them. You simply stopped bleeding for someone who fed on your wounds. Now they're stuck with the ending they never prepared for. You walked away whole, healed, and untouchable, while they're left alone in the ruins of a world that only functioned because you kept holding it up. Your exit wasn't revenge. It was justice served in silence. You made it to the end, chosen one, and that alone proves how far you've risen above everything that once tried to break you. Your exit was power. Your silence was strategy, and your evolution is the finale they never saw coming. If this message hit home, press the like button if you haven't already, and if you're still not part of our family, make sure to press the subscribe button so you never walk this journey alone again. Your story isn't ending here. This is the part where everything finally shifts in your favor.